We'll get to the latest on the coronavirus in just a second, including some disturbing news about a new variant called Delta Plus.
Yeah, but we began with the Senate's failure to advance a voting rights bill. It comes as President Biden faces a critical week for his legislative agenda. The president called the voting rights legislation a top priority, and despite the loss, Democrats say they are down but not out. Meanwhile, the White House is working to move on, quietly pushing forward with an infrastructure plan and an effort to target gun violence. It's our lead story, and we're covering it from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell and NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Leanne, let's start with you on this. What issues did Republicans have with this bill, and what, if anything, can Democrats do now for voting rights reform?
Good morning, Ellison. So Republicans remained opposed and united in that opposition to this legislation. And overwhelmingly, they say that this is a federal takeover of the elections. And so it's something that they cannot support. Even the two who are most likely to support it, Senator Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, went to the Senate floor to speak in opposition of this legislation. The Democrats, while they lost this vote because it did not get the 60 votes required, they did get a small victory in that all Democrats were united in favor of this legislation. They gained the support of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who was reluctant for a while to support this procedural motion. He ended up voting with the Democrats. Now Democrats can say that they are opposed, that only Republicans have blocked this measure. Now, while they did lose this vote, Democrats are insisting that the fight is not over. Let's listen to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. For voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line. Let me say that again. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line.
So what can Democrats do? That's a little unclear. There's going to be ramped up pressure for Democrats to get rid of the filibuster, but they don't have the votes for that either. Democrats are also talking about a litigation strategy in the states and in the federal government, and instilling the Justice Department to use all resources necessary to ensure fair and accurate voting at the polls. But legislatively, it's going to be a very tough battle, Ellison.
And Monica, Vice President Harris was actually in the Senate chamber for this vote. Tell us, how did she respond to its failure, and what, if anything, has President Biden said?
And remember, this is just something on her plate that is full of many different homework assignments from the president. Voting rights was added just last month, so she has been talking behind the scenes with lawmakers, trying to see also with voting rights advocates and groups how this could advance. But she was also not very optimistic about obviously what was going to unfold yesterday, but she is saying she has hope for the future, and that in the words of the Senate Majority Leader as well, this battle is just beginning. Take a listen to her response after the measure failed.
Clear, certainly, for the American people, that when we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process, or is that being impeded? And the bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
The timeline, remember, Ellison and Aaron, was supposed to be the month of June. Obviously, very little runway left if we look at it in terms of that. So this will stretch on into the summer, but the path forward is unclear, though President Biden did release a statement echoing a lot of what the vice president said, but in perhaps a clue of where this goes next. He said he would have a lot more to say on this topic starting next week. So perhaps they will have an event at the White House. Some critics had argued that President Biden didn't say enough when it came to voting rights, that he'd been talking so much about infrastructure, about COVID, of course, hosting those lawmakers at the White House. They were urging him to get more involved, and perhaps that's what we're going to see in a more concentrated way next week.
Yeah, I mean, a lot going on. You mentioned infrastructure, Leanne. White House officials are set to host top Democrats for more infrastructure talks. Where do those stand right now? And is there any hope of a deal here?
Well, Ellison, that's right. Top White House officials are meeting with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer this evening about infrastructure. While that is happening, we also have these bipartisan negotiations that are still ongoing, also meeting with White House officials. But that bipartisan plan hit a major snag yesterday after meeting with White House officials all day long. Republicans came out pretty deflated because the White House took off more ways to pay for it off the table, including a highway infrastructure bank, repurposing COVID funds. And so they are really running out of options that the two sides can agree on how to pay for this legislation. And that has always been the biggest sticking point. And so if they can't agree how to pay for it, then this deal is going to fall apart. And again, they don't have a lot of time. Meanwhile, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer are going to meet with White House officials on what is likely to be a partisan package that Democrats can pass alone, something that's going to be much bigger, and that Democrats could much more easily agree how to pay for it, Ellison.
And Monica, the White House has also released new details on the president's plan to address the rise in gun violence nationwide. What is he hoping to do with that?
Later today, the White House is really going to be hosting this larger event with key stakeholders in this issue, and then both the president and the attorney general are going to unveil what they're calling their comprehensive strategy to try to tackle the rise in not just gun violence, but crime nationwide. And what they're going to propose is that each state really make a decision for themselves, leaving this to the local level, but to dip into some of the money that comes from the American Rescue Plan, more than $350 billion that has been allocated at the more local level for people, if police departments want to hire more officers, if they want to pay more overtime, for instance, that they could use that. But this is going to be really the beginning of it. Remember, of course, a couple of months ago, the president unveiled his executive actions at gun violence and really gun safety methods. So that's something we might hear a little bit more on today, because they feel that's a huge part of this problem. But there is a big concern in the White House heading into these summer months, as we've seen these crime rates tick up, that's going to be a huge problem. So they're trying to get out in front of it today by laying out some of the issues and some of the things they feel they can do at the federal level, though, again, they are deferring a lot to these counties and municipalities to decide what's best for them when it comes to this.
All right, voting rights, infrastructure, gun violence, a lot of very important issues. Very busy week, I am sure, for both of you. Thank you so much, Leanne and Monica, for keeping us informed.